Well, hello. If you are new to Cross Creek, you probably don't understand what's going on here on this little YouTube channel. But this is the remix, our season two, as we say, of the Brandon and Brian show. We did this for Sunday school during COVID, and we are bringing it back for another season. So the writing strike is over, and the producers are in line, and we have some marching orders from our pastor, and we're gonna just kind of go through um, some of the writings and some of the background of the "Be Thou My Vision" daily devotional that we are as a church are trying to use and integrate into our call to worship and in our daily devotion. So I'm Brandon, if you don't know that already, and
I'm Brian.
and so welcome to the Brandon and Brian show once again. So Brian, I guess I'll just kind of ask you, you know, what are your thoughts about what we're going to do here? We're gonna have some short, these are gonna be little short little sessions. So why don't you just kind of explain
Yeah.
what it is that we're doing?
Yeah, I think we're just going to do some intros because Be Thou My Vision introduces things like catechisms. We've done that in our church before, but it references several in there that you can do. It's referencing creeds, it's referencing people in church history. So we want to do some intro videos to really explain what those things are, why we find use in them, maybe some of the history of them, but start off in this intro with really like the creeds, the catechisms, and the confessions. Like
Yeah,
what are these three things, and also the councils?
yeah,
How do they play into this larger picture?
yeah. So why don't we just talk about that? So we use these words, and sometimes someone's been coming to church for a long time and they might hear these words: creeds, councils, confessions, catechisms, um and they don't know what those are, where they come from, why we have them. Um so I guess we'll just start from the bottom, I mean the oldest, and then kind of move kind of chronologically. So first we have some things that we call councils that
Mhm.
came out with some stuff. So, from your readings, Brian, when you think of a church council, what pops into your head?
Yeah, so these church councils are convened to take on kind of the largest issues of the day. So it's really twofold. They're affirming what things are part of Christianity, and they're also addressing heresies or potential heresies. So in church history, they say that there's seven ecumenical councils
Okay.
that, at least in principle, the Orthodox, the Protestant, and the Catholic all agree on.
Yeah.
And it'll actually play into some of the things that we'll see as far as creeds. So
Right.
there's a Council of Nicaea, and the Nicene Creed comes out of it. So you'll see emphases on things like the Trinity, things that are being discussed. And so they've gathered all of the thinkers of that region, the bishops, and they all come to a central place to debate, discuss, and hammer them out.
Yeah. And one thing about the councils, they, early on, it was like, how do we understand Jesus? How do we understand the Trinity? Like you said, what books of the Bible are actually scripture? These were not, the assumption is these groups of these bishops would come together and they would create these doctrines, like
Mhm.
that they were great. And that's not how they functioned, right? They functioned in a way that they would kind of ask the question, what is it that's being taught in the Orthodox Church? What is it that we hold to? Like particularly like what books of the Bible that would come out in the early councils, which what they would ask the question, what books are being read in the churches?
Right.
They didn't say, oh, we like this one, we don't like this one,
Right.
right? And it's like, no, we know that this has apostolic connection, apostolic authority, and we
Right.
are, and so it's, or when it came to like the hypostatic union, or different controversies would come up, right? So you have the Arian controversy would come up, they would
Mhm.
convene a council, and they said, wait a minute, no, Christ is fully God and fully man.
Mhm.
he did not lose his godhood when he came, and so the council would defend the Orthodox and provide, as you said, a creed, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And then those creeds end up being kind of these boundary markers of like Christian thought and non-Christian thought. So it's really getting to the essence of the virgin birth, the nature of the Trinity. Christ's nature is fully God and fully man. You'll see these, especially in this Be Thou My Vision, where you're looking at the different creeds and they're repeating a lot of the same things. That's because that was what was controversial, but also still what separates Christian thought from non-Christian thought. So I think this is kind of the first 5 centuries
Yeah,
approximately.
yeah,
We have after Christ where we get these creeds, and it's kind of it's not the full scope of the Christian faith, it's kind of the essentials of the Christian faith.
right. Yeah, and I would like to say we have warrant for the idea of these councils in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
So the very first council isn't an ecumenical council, right? It's the council that met in Jerusalem when the big controversy of the day was, okay, this Paul guy's going around and telling these Gentiles that they're part of the people of God, that they're a part of the ecclesia, the church and the assembly, and can they do that without things like circumcision, and
Yeah.
and this
Or being
justification,
kosher eating.
yeah,
Yeah.
and kosher and what they're doing, and so Scripture shows us this example of how the leaders of the church come together and they make a definitive statement on what is the reality of our truth and what Scripture teaches, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore, and that goes down, right?
Right.
Um, so anyway, so that's good. So there's councils, which were these collections of bishops during particularly the first 5 centuries of the church,
Mm-hmm.
and they would come out with different creeds that we kind of hold to for the essential faiths. And then we have these confessions
Right.
that kind of come out, particularly the ones that we talk about, and the ones that you'll find in here are the confessions that kind of were birthed during the Reformation.
That's right.
3 forms of unity, Westminster Confession of Faith. So what's the difference between a creed and a confession?
So I think of the confessions are we're kind of coloring now within the lines of like denominational distinctives. So all of those first order things are already taken care of. The Apostles' Creed, Chalcedonian Creed, so those are the who is God, what is God like. So we are not necessarily dealing with first order issues anymore. So you might have a London Baptist confession,
Yeah, from
Westminster.
1646.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So you're going to have these different confessions, and you certainly have some on the Lutheran side, would maybe a
yes,
good way to think about. These are now distinctives of how they view things like the Lord's Supper,
yeah,
and different things like that. So if the creeds are the skeleton, the confessions are kind of the ligaments and the muscles built around it, is the way I think of it.
yeah, and that they are, our constitutional documents, right? Like so, we are bound as me and you are currently, we're not on the session, but we are both ruling elders in the PCA. Once a ruling elder, always a ruling elder. Unless they kick you out for some reason. You get a little crazy. We get a little squirrely with our theology in these lectures.
Right.
Um, but we are bound to hold up the confessional standards, right? And so uh particularly the Westminster Confession, but not some of these other confessions here, like so the Heidelberg is, kind of from the Dutch Reformed tradition and a part of the 3 forms of unity, which is the Heidelberg Catechism, the Baltic Confession, and the Canons of Dort. Um, those are Canons of Dort in particular, which is just the 5 points of Calvinism, for the most part, kind of an affirmation of, what we believe as Reformed Christians. But these documents are rich, right? I mean, of course, the joke that I was always told, when I was starting to learn about these confessions is, the Westminster Confession was written by a whole bunch of lawyers, and the Heidelberg Catechism was written by poets.
Right.
And if you read the two documents, there's a lot of truth to that, right? I mean,
There is.
the, but
Yeah. Yeah, and then I would just say lastly that the catechisms is how you teach the truth of those things. So it's the truth of what's Christian and non-Christian that came out of the councils and were
Yeah.
codified in the creeds, and then those denominational distinctives. But it's also kind of how to teach it to ourselves, and then particularly like new believers and children as well. You and I have both taught communicants classes where children that are ready to make a profession of faith in the church go through this, and the catechisms are great places to go for those kinds of things. So you'll see the Westminster and the Heidelberg Catechism both in this book.
Yeah, and I haven't looked through all the sections on that, just so people know. So there's the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is kind of the longer, more descriptive whole, discussion of what we believe as Presbyterians. Then there's the larger catechism, which used to be all the questions, a little bit more detail that pastors have always been held to in the history of the church, to make sure that they kind of had those memorized. And then you had the shorter catechism that was really used for the children. And now we've gone down a level over the last, couple hundred years, where we've made the children's catechism, because the shorter catechism is too hard for our kids, and the shorter catechism is what pastors tend to get grilled on what they actually have an understanding of. And so that's just kind of a funny reality of, we keep moving. We think in some ways we're moving to greater technological understanding and sophistication of the world, but when it comes to really applying our minds to understanding the faith, these things seemed like too much, you know.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree with you though. There's so much richness to
Hmm.
to what is in here. And that's what we hope to kind of do some introductions to this material that if you've been doing it, you've gone through a month now, but just getting a good sense of why these things are being included in a book that we're looking at in 2024.
Yeah. All right. I think we've kind of done the intro, Brian. So we're gonna end this first session here, and then we're gonna move on, and next month, and we're gonna talk about one of the other particular confessions and some details that go into those.
Yeah,
So
thanks.
thank you for watching the Brandon and Brian Show, and we'll be back soon.